Welcome to Bookstars. 31st July was the birth anniversary of Damodar Dharmananda Kosambi, and Goa celebrated anniversary with a book launch, which is a biography on Didi Kosambi titled One Life, Many Worlds by Professor Ramaswamy. There have been many writings on Kosambi, uh, but this is a first biography, and it took almost 60 years for someone to write a biography on Kosambi. Uh, Professor Ramaswamy is the former professor of physical sciences at JNU, a former vice chancellor of University of Hyderabad. He has been honorary professor at ISER Behrampur, visiting professor at IIT Delhi, and he also holds the Didi Kosambi Chair in Interdisciplinary Studies at Goa University. He has been also president of Indian Academy of Sciences. And if you look at Professor Ramaswamy's journey and Kosambi's scholarly life, I don't think there will not have been any right person to write a biography of Kosambi. And there are remarkable parallels in terms of Professor Ramaswamy and Kosambi, in the sense that Professor Ramaswamy and Kosambi both got their degrees from America. Kosambi returned to Tata Institute of Fundamental Research when he came back to India. In the same way, Professor Ramaswamy also joined Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. Kosambi's passion was statistics and mathematics, and Professor Ramaswamy's interests are computational biology and statistical physics. And what is more remarkable is that Kosambi pioneered combined methods, and Professor Ramaswamy uses combined methods to write biography of Damodar Dharmananda Kosambi. So it's almost 60 years that no one have thought of writing biography on Kosambi, although there are small articles and essays on him. And therefore, this work is remarkable and also launched on his birth anniversary. Uh, and it's also very strange that we have a prominent scientist writing a biography on Kosambi. This is a genre that is not usually they are into it. Uh, uh, so how did you thought of taking on Didi Kosambi? And it's become more important because no Goan has thought of doing it.
Thank you very much for having me here, Parag. And I should request you, please just call me Ram. I find it more convenient to respond to Ram rather than the whole name. Anyway, thanks. I sort of happened to do this almost by chance. Partly because it hadn't been done before. Like any good academic, I think, or I like to think, we do try to see where are the gaps in knowledge, what are the areas where one can contribute. And even I was surprised that, given the fact that he had such a rich life and was so important to all of India, not just to Goa, and his journey started over here, I was surprised that there wasn't a more comprehensive biography. There is one very nice biography by Chintamani Deshmukh, but it was published in Marathi, so it had a limited circulation, and it was translated also into English, but somehow it has its limitations, partly because there are important parts of his life that the book doesn't actually address. And I think to understand the nature of his work, his contributions to knowledge, etc., I think it was necessary to do a lot of archival work. And although the biography took 60 years in your reckoning, it took me about 3 or 4 actually. Mostly because I am now a retired from JNU, and and I'm in an honorary position at various places, including the University of Goa. So all this made me sort of turn to this particular subject, and I'm happy that I've been able to bring a biography onto the table now.
This biography, although it's titled about Damodar Dharmananda Kosambi, but it's a biography also of Dharmananda Kosambi. In fact, there are seven first chapters that remarkably tries to capture life and work of Dharmananda Kosambi as well. Now, what is remarkable about this biography is that we have never looked at Dharmanand's role in shaping Damodar Kosambi. And you have a very interesting statement to make in terms of how closely father knew his son. And there is a reference to the way in which Dharmanand selected house for Kosambi, and he selected his house, in between Bandarkar, the Oriental Research Institute, uh, and Ferguson College. So he understood his son very closely. That was a wise choice. So how do you look at Damodar Dharmanand in influencing and shaping Damodar Kosambi?
Well, see, there's something very peculiar about the younger Kosambi, that is Damodar, although nobody ever called him Damodar Kosambi, everyone called him DDK or Baba. So there's a little, you see, he was revolutionary in the way in which he introduced the scientific method to the study of history. He was very daring on a lot of fronts. He wrote about poetry. He wrote about various things. He was very, one would say, almost. He was brave. Went out on a limb. But when it came to his personal life, he was remarkably docile. He obeyed his father and mother implicitly. Uh, for example, when there was the freedom movement and everyone was, all the students were agitating, he was strongly on the side of of course, for the freedom movement, but he was hesitant to join because his parents had said, no, you can't go out onto the street because you are so hot-tempered, you will be turned to violence. And so he obeyed them. Likewise, when it came to the question of his marriage, he was the only one of his parents' children who followed their choice. So he had an arranged marriage. His three sisters all had not exactly, marriages of choice rather than following what their parents had said, and they all married out of the subcaste. That is, they were originally Gaud Saraswat Brahmins, but the sisters all married outside the subcaste, whereas Didi Kosambi married. So it was this peculiar combination. No, he listened to his father a lot. He had a lot of respect for him, um, all the way till the end.
The other fascinating aspect that comes through the work is the the role of American schooling system and the Harvard University that played a very important role in Kosambi's life. So how do you look at Kosambi at Harvard?
See, I think that, there were two aspects to it. The first is, of course, which one should acknowledge, that when the Kosambis went to America in 1918, they went as Portuguese citizens of Portugal. Uh, and so they traveled on Portuguese passports as citizens of, of the West, of a Western country, so to speak. They also, he went to school and grew up from the age of 11. He was in America. He changed radically from there. He was a young, sickly boy when he left from Pune, and pretty soon he went to the gym, he bulked up, and when he came back, he was, tall, well built, and he really, changed physically. Mentally, he was allowed to do any subject he wanted. So in school, he was learning English for the first time, but he was doing elocution as a subject. He learned Latin, he learned Greek, he was on the swim team. So he did many things that he could not have done as an Indian schoolboy, particularly in Pune. He wouldn't have been able to do it at that time. And in the university, he was able to take a combination of courses pretty much as he liked. So he did a lot of mathematics. Some semester he only studied mathematics. Then in another semester he did English, German, Italian, military science. So that freedom to do things meant that he was designing his own education. And that was an important thing for him.
Okay, Maning, if you look at the biography, there are three things which comes out very prominently. One is Dharmanand, Harvard University, and the third important aspect is mathematics. Mathematics played a very important role in academic pursuits of Kosambi, and we know that Ram has published earlier works on analyzing the role of mathematics in shaping Kosambi's academic journey. So, could you please tell us something about the importance of mathematics in Kosambi's life?
See, from a very young age, that is even before he went to university, Kosambi had uh, learned, to be very inquisitive about certain things. So while he was in school, he was interested in correlating the marks that people got with their age, with their gender. Right, this is already, we are talking in roughly 1920 or so. He wanted to know, what does the performance in a subject, how does it depend on puberty? How does it depend on gender, and so on, right? So he wanted to do statistical analysis already when he was an undergrad. Mathematics was, he was very gifted in mathematics, and even the leading mathematicians of America at that time, they would tell him that, to focus and they thought that he had a lot of talent. But he also had talent in other areas, So with his father, he is every day discussing Pali or Sanskrit. And the father had his own ideas about, Indian history is incomplete. This is not, so the father was telling him things. They were also part of the freedom movement when he was in America. So he had a lot of influences coming his way. And even so, he was in America, there was a certain amount of isolation. That is, the family was a unit that, because they were one of the few South Asians in Cambridge at that time. There weren't a lot of, there were more than just the Kosambis, but it wasn't as if there were hundreds of Indians over there. Maximum would have been about maybe 10 more. Right? So they had a small community and would exchange a lot of ideas. So the influence of the father on both his children, that he had taken to America, was very important. And in addition to Kosambi, that is D.D. Kosambi, his older sister Manik was with them. And it's worth remembering that she was the first person from the subcontinent to graduate from Harvard University. She went to Radcliffe College, which was the women's college associated with Harvard, and she's the first South Asian woman to graduate from there, and one of the very first of people of color to graduate from there. And I think it's worth celebrating her achievement also, because she got a BA in philosophy in 1922. Which is unusual, and I don't think Goa recognizes that nearly enough.
What is remarkable about Kosambi is that he was far ahead of times. Apart from his campaign for solar energy, there is other interesting detail that we have talked about is how innovative he was with regards to various problems that he saw. And one of the serious social issue that concerned him was famines, and how to try to look at agrarian productivity. And he came up with an idea of aerial photography at that point of time. So could you please give us some details on that?
This is among the lesser known aspects of Kosambi because, like I said, uh, there will be, I hope, there will be scholars who will now study a little more about Kosambi because this archival material is not very difficult to find. I mean, it's easily available. Um, at some point in time in the late 1940s, after he had applied statistics to the study of ancient Indian coins, he turned his attention to other areas where he felt statistics could be useful. One was the study of tuberculosis. Right, so he was in touch with people at a tuberculosis hospital in Andhra, Madras Presidency, in a place called Madanapalle. So he was in touch with them, trying to get data, but the data was not particularly good. He tried to work with people in Bombay hospitals on cervical cancer. Again, the data was not particularly good. And at some point, he started talking with statisticians who were interested in agriculture. There was a great statistics person called P.V. Sukhatme, who was in the ICAR, the Imperial Council of Agricultural Research. And they would be discussing, how to estimate the crop production from sample surveys. The standard technique, which is now quite common, that was introduced by Fisher and others in those days, how to apply it over here. Now, what Kosambi realized is that the area that we have to cover is huge. And there's a lot of illiteracy, so people are not going to be able to give data. So his idea was, let's fly a plane over a particular region, and from the air try to figure out, just by looking at the color and the contrast, can one figure out what the plants are and how to estimate what the production is going to be, and choose a few sample ones for detailed study, and then from that extrapolate as to the overall production. It wasn't just coffee time chat for him. He wrote to the agencies in London. He tried to get data for, how well can you predict what are the plants from an aerial photograph? How high should the planes fly? And then he wrote to ICS officers. He wrote to, then by that time they had joined the IAS. He wrote to the Air Force. He tried to get people to, do these. But for one reason or the other, that couldn't happen until he communicated some of these ideas to people like Satish Dhawan, who then became many years later became the chairman of ISRO. And when Satish Dhawan was becoming mature as a scientist, he was in close correspondence with Kosambi. One of the, his daughter says that Kosambi was a big influence on him. I like to think, right? I mean, these are not all documented because nobody writes everywhere that this is how it goes. That today, when you do these satellite observations and the SAT data that is used for crop estimation, some idea goes back to Kosambi.
Kosambi was also at Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. And today, if you look at Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, is largely known for the founding director, Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha. But this book tries to give us other important aspect of Kosambi. Kosambi as an institution builder, while Kosambi's role in contributing towards building of Tata Institute of Fundamental Research is not recognized. You try to engage with this role at Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. So how important it is. Kosambi was second after Baba.
Right. See, okay, so the fact is that he was the second appointment, and he wasn't a second appointment a year later, he was a second appointment the same month. All right, so when the institute started, there were two people on the faculty, one was Bhabha, one was DDK, right? And Baba hired him explicitly for mathematics, not for not for statistics, and certainly not for like a service or mathematics. He was just a mathematician, and he was a senior person. I think in the initial years they vibed quite well, but their backgrounds were very different. One was a Parsi, upper class, very closely related to the
With
Tatas,
yeah.
so well-to-do, and was educated in Cambridge, England. The other was from a poor Goan family. Father was born and brought up in Sankhwal, not particularly wealthy, but by an accident of scholarship, he had gone to Harvard, and he had studied in Cambridge, United States. So, both were from Cambridge on opposite sides of the pond, but they came with very different kinds of social capital. D.D. Kosambi had gone to America, so he knew all the latest, things that were happening in America, which, after all, by 1945 was the leading it wasn't yet a superpower, but it was the major Western power. Bhabha, on the other hand, was still stuck with, not still stuck, but he had the background of England, a country which we were fighting to get out, get out of our land. So, they brought very different sensibilities to this. In some very deep way, Kosambi was much better read than Bhabha in the breadth of his studies. But in another deep way, Bhabha was much more artistically gifted. His drawing was better, painting was better, very complementary. So they would discuss a lot, and in the first few years of Tata Institute, many of the practices that later on became a part of TIFR were actually established. I don't want to say by Kosambi, but certainly in close discussion with Kosambi. I'll just give you two examples. The first international visitor to TIFR was a mathematician called Chern, a Chinese, now he died as a Chinese-American mathematician, but at that time he was from China, and he was a Chinese mathematician, S.S. Chern. He went on to become really famous and important, but he was the first visitor that Kosambi invited and brought to Bombay. And this was already, setting out the pattern that, that TIFR would periodically have important mathematicians visiting. The other is a very typically Kosambi lateral kind of suggestion. When Bhabha, all the permissions, etc., had come, and the idea was, let's make a building for TIFR. So Bhabha wanted to get the best architect in the world, etc. So he suggested we should get Frank Lloyd Wright, the great American architect. So Kosambi said, look, Frank Lloyd Wright is old. He has never designed anything in the tropics, right? So there's no point getting Frank Lloyd Wright. You should get somebody from the other school of architecture in Europe was the Bauhaus. So he says, you should get a Bauhaus architect. Why don't you talk to Gropius or, whatever, some of these leading Bauhaus people, right? Incidentally, the Bauhaus style eventually came to India through IIM Ahmedabad
Yeah,
and various
yeah.
other places, right? So, but Bhabha could see that this was a good suggestion. And finally, they got Helmut Bartsch, who was from this school of Bauhaus. So the TIFR building and the whole design, you can say that, he influenced it. Although he never went to that building, he influenced it.
Kosambi has written almost a dozen of books and 175 articles. Uh, but he has not written much about Goa. There is only one article that he writes in Myth and Reality on village community system. How do you see Kosambi's connections, both father as well as son, to Goa?
I think the father was much closer to Goa because, the father never left Goa for 25 years and then he never came back, more or less. They had a connection. They had land in Sankwal. Kosambi actually had to come here to sell the land. And at that time, because it was communal property, he brought his wife to Goa for the first and only time. Because she automatically became an owner of the land and had to sell it. For the senior Kosambi, his Marathi identity was more important than the Goan identity in some sense. That was the language that he first learnt and did. Whereas for the wife, for Kosambi's mother, the Konkani identity was more important than Marathi, even though she spent most of her life in Bangalore. I would say that, for the senior Kosambi, Goa was more intrinsic. Whereas for the junior Kosambi, after he was 5 years old, he never really lived in Goa for any length of time. And that's probably one of the reasons why he uh, felt he couldn't write more about Goa, because he didn't have the data or the experience.
Kosambi is very relevant to our contemporary times, and that was one of the reason why government of Goa had launched Didi Kosambi Festival of Ideas, but unfortunately it has lost its momentum on the way. How do you look at Kosambi and our times today?
See, I think that Kosambi is, you cannot just overemphasize. He was an engaged academic and an engaged public intellectual in the last century. It's important. I feel that, one of the things that would be nice to do is to remove the DD from the Festival of Ideas and let it just be a Kosambi Festival of Ideas, because there are many Kosambis to celebrate and many people related to these ideas. Uh, I think, for example, any kind of public engagement was very important to both the father and the son. See, one of the important things to remember is that both of them took their job of public communication very seriously. Not education, maybe, but they both wrote extensively. But let me first talk about the father. He wrote in Marathi and in Konkani, and he contributed to magazines, journals, books, and he wrote for the public. So very simple writing, and a lot of it. He wrote some very few articles in English, but he did, and one in Hindi, which I have recently translated. But his main idea was bring the knowledge of the Buddha to the people. He was a very staunch Buddhist, uh, and he saw Buddhism as a proxy. Well, he saw a lot of similarity between socialism and Buddhism, right? Didi, on the other hand, was an academic writer, right? But he also wrote in newspapers. There are lots of newspaper articles that he wrote, especially on social issues, on solar energy, on nuclear energy, on
Yeah.
Buddhism, and on something that Vivek Montero was emphasizing yesterday, which of course is absolutely true. An idea of Didi Kosambi was that it should be distributed production of solar energy and distributed production of energy. So small dams all over the place rather than one big dam somewhere. Right?
Thank you, Professor Ram, for coming to Bookstars, and thank you all of you for joining us. Thank you.
Right. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.